1947, the United States government would become mired in secrecy when an alien spacecraft crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. The Roswell incident seemed just to involve debris from a craft of some sort, as no main part of the craft could be found on the Brazel Ranch. This led to speculation that the main part of the craft had managed to travel on before coming to rest. Later, the second section of the saucer was found. It came down in an area west of Chirrocco, New Mexico, known as the Plains of San Agustin, where witnesses discovered a strange metallic object and several dead bodies. The bodies and wreckage were sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for study. Many speculate it remains there to this day. After the Roswell incident, the United States government began many programs to study UFOs. Project Sign, Project Grudge, and later Project Blue Book, to name a few. Some may assume the country was simply keeping tabs on a growing public phenomenon. However, these reports filtered through the highest offices within the government. As early as 1948, the government already knew the UFO secret. In that year, the United States Air Force produced its top secret and highly controversial estimate of the situation, an official report concluding flying saucers to be interplanetary in origin. General Nathan Twining, head of the Air Materiel Command, stated that flying saucers were real and not visionary or fictitious, that they had metallic or light-reflecting surfaces, were circular or elliptical in shape, flat on the bottom and domed on top, and were sometimes sighted in well-kept formation flights varying from 3 to 9 objects. A top-secret Canadian government document dating from 1950, written by Wilbert Smith, the head of the Canadian government's UFO research project entitled Magnet, quotes Mr. Smith saying, "The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher than the H-bomb." By 1969, after multiple secret studies had concluded that flying saucers were very real, the United States government closed its public study on UFOs. Project Blue Book ended with assurance from the government that the UFOs represented no threat to national security. However, Brigadier General C.H. Bolender states that even after the Blue Book system was dissolved, that reports of UFOs would still continue to be handled through the standard Air Force procedures designated for this purpose. Furthermore, he wrote, reports of unidentified flying objects which could affect national security were not a part of the Blue Book system. To date, these other investigation channels, agencies, or groups are completely unknown and secret.
At the end of the 1980s, it was clear that the government had to do something. There was massive interest and people were beginning to ask questions. Even people close to American presidents were intrigued to find out what Roswell was really all about. And so in 1994, the American government said that something had indeed happened in Roswell which they couldn't speak about. That it was a secret project called Project Mogul, which involved special air balloons which were somehow floated into the top parts of the sky to find out whether or not atomic explosions had occurred somewhere. And so they couldn't explain this in 1947, which is why there was a cover-up. Now, it didn't answer really why there were bodies. And so a few years later, in 1997, the government came back and said, oh yes, we forgot about that, and the bodies you saw were not human bodies at all. They are test dummies, which we somehow put up in the sky and then dropped to the ground, and this is what people saw. The problem is that those test dummies didn't exist in 1947. And the government was saying that this somehow happened somewhere in the 1950s. And so what the American government is trying to tell you is this, that you have to believe them. That somehow in 1947 they lied, and that it was a special air balloon which they couldn't talk about. And then that somehow later on near Roswell, crash dummies landed on ground. And that somehow the likes of Marcel, Blanchard and everybody else involved with the Roswell story is mistaken. That somehow they have put together two stories which happened several years ago, several years apart, and that they can't tell what really happened at Roswell. But that the American government knows perfectly well, and you just have to trust them, that they know perfectly well.
In 1947, if the government told you to keep a secret, it was considered your patriotic duty to hold that information. Jesse Marcel Sr. was loyal to his country, and above all else, he was a patriot. During the press conference, Marcel was told to pose with materials from a mogul balloon. Though he knew it was not the materials he had brought back from Corona, he complied with his orders.
You know, that says a couple things about him. One, he could be trusted with information that was obviously very valuable to the war, that they didn't trust, you know, the 99.9% of the people with. And he was one of those people, it tells a little bit about himself and his ability to, you know, you can imagine, I'm about to work with a team, I'm going to tell them where to drop a bomb, it's going to kill thousands and thousands of people. To take that responsibility and to be able to put yourself aside and follow your orders, and that's exactly what he did. He really paid for that later in life.
Under orders from Colonel Blanchard, Jesse Marcel and a man in plain clothes took the crash debris back to the Roswell Air Base. There it was flown to Wright-Patterson and sequestered away to be studied. The broken pieces of the craft were kept in a secure location codenamed the Blue Room, and the legend of Roswell was born.
What is the Blue Room? Various question marks exist as to whether or not there is a facility at Wright-Patterson Airfield Base, which really is the container of everything which your government doesn't want you to know. It is said that within the Blue Room, the secrets of UFOs can be found. And some even suggest that the name Blue Room has to do with the fact that in the 1950s there was a government inquiry called Project Blue Book, which allegedly went in search of the truth as to what UFOs were all about, but in reality was just another cover-up. It's probably no coincidence that one of the people who was involved with Project Blue Book was Roger Remy, the guy who in 1947, a few years later, told Jesse Marcel to deny the truth as to what happened in Roswell. He was the one who pushed a weather balloon into Jesse Marcel's hands and basically told him to go on the record and say that he had misidentified a weather balloon as a flying saucer.
When it went to Hangar 18, that was pretty much the end of my grandmother's direct contact with the material. You know, up to that point he was able to handle it, that sort of thing. On a side story, while all of this was happening, there was, if you recall, the debris field was approximately a span shape, 3/4 of a mile long, littered fairly evenly with material. The more perceptible would be the foil that you can see from the sun shining. But in the debris field, soon after, there was a call and there was actually a crashed hull of a UFO about 25 miles away. Now, my grandfather was not involved in that whatsoever. He did not see it, he wasn't part of it, but he also stood by the people who saw it. He said, I didn't see it, but the people who talked about this, I believe them. I mean, there's no reason not to believe his co-workers and other people in intelligence. When they went out to investigate it, saying, why didn't my grandfather investigate that site? The bigger this became, the military does like to compartmentalize things. They would not want to have one individual having all of the information. So it goes hand in hand as to why he would not have been part of that second site. The second site was interesting. There's reports of alien bodies, of an alien that actually had lived and through the crash injured but was alive. And that became there was a lot of, the story came down to where on the base there's medical work done on cadavers of aliens, that sort of thing.
Major Jesse Marcel never saw the bodies, but it is clear that a few days later bodies were recovered. And so what we have here is a story of two halves. The story of somebody who has handled material which he absolutely knew was not of this earth. And a few days later he probably got confirmation when they found the bodies that indeed this material came not from this planet. In the 3 weeks following Roswell, Jesse Marcel was given leave, and we don't know what happened, whether he was put somewhere and questioned or whether he became part of the people who was allowed to investigate the Roswell crash any further. But it is clear that once he returned to Roswell, either immediately or in the coming weeks, that he began to speak to other people. And even though he probably didn't get definitive proof as in another I-beam in his hands, he probably knew more than anybody else that what really had happened at Roswell was precisely what we are piecing together. The story of an extraterrestrial craft which crash landed in the desert just north of Roswell, New Mexico.
Every historical event can be traced back to a pivotal moment, a moment in time when everything changed. For the Marcel family, that moment was the evening when Jesse Marcel Sr. brought home a box of debris from the crash site. It is this moment when the event became real for them and would be handed down through each generation.
My father looked on one of the beams. They're like little I-beams, anywhere from 4 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches, and there was a box that might have had several pieces that were longer than that. And they said you look on them, there's like an aluminum beam, I-beam cross-section, I cross-section, and it looked just plain. It looked like it was kind of the same material as the foil parts that he also brought back, and just had structure to them rather than a very light foil. And if you looked at them dead on, there wasn't anything appreciable, but if you held it at an angle, then these symbols would appear in between the shoulders, it's called. And especially if you held up the light a certain way, they become very perceptible. They were like a light violet in color. And my grandfather at that point remarked that you guys are probably the first ones to ever see this alien language in history. So nobody's ever seen this before. And that's always been an interesting part of the story. And you couldn't see them straight on, so they're almost like it hasn't been said, but from what almost like a hologram, in that they had dimension only once you would angle them at a certain degree. Crescent moons, dashes, dots, that sort of thing. And it took, like I said, it took on this really strange appearance.
There was a lot of rather thick foil-like material, kind of not a shiny aluminum, but burnished or a slate gray type of aluminum metal. There was black plastic type debris like bakelite, which was shattered. It was very brittle material. And then there were fragments of what appeared to be I-beams, relatively small, but the typical I-beam type configuration.
For families like the Marcels, the Blanchards, there was never any doubt this was true, this has happened. And of course there was the evidence in the I-beam in the kitchen a few years or a few months afterwards, when they were holding it and looking at it and seeing this is evidence of what happened. So what for the rest of the world has been speculation, and for very large sections of the world population today continues to be a question mark, for them it is an absolute truth. They know, and the Marcel family are so adamant in getting this out because for them it is a truth which needs to come out into the open.
I have always, as a lot of people have thought about Roswell, why didn't they tell people about this? They felt we couldn't handle it, the people couldn't handle it. I've always thought that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think people would have loved to have been able to been part of that UFO, that life does exist out there, the wonderment, the fantastic idea that we're not alone. I think it was more of our government knowing that they had a piece of technology that no one else had, and for us to stay on top, and just like any other top secret program, it was going to be kept, and kept very tight. Like when you think about the Mogul balloon, another top secret program. When in history have you ever seen where they release a top secret program to all the newspapers in color? Oh, it's black and white. They bring it out, it's in every newspaper, it's on every radio, disclosing all these details about a top secret program. They decided that, well, obviously this Mogul balloon program, although important, had nothing in comparison to what they had found in the desert that day. So it was easy for them to give up a little bit to hold the prize.
Despite the fear of any ramifications Jesse Marcel Sr. may have endured, he did talk with his family about the incident. This usually consisted of brief conversations over the years, sparked by some headline or media event in the news. However, Jesse Jr. often talked with his son about the pieces he handled and the infamous I-beam with alien text embossed on it. Later, the family would commission a replica of the I-beam so future generations could see the detail it contained. While in Roswell, Jesse and Philip discussed the I-beam's construction.
Well, this is the I-beam that we created. It's basically, it's a similar size, the width, the thickness, that sort of thing, that my father described. And the placement of the symbols along it, the colors of the symbols are matching the violet colors that they talked about. And we're not quite sure, we don't have the order of them, that kind of thing. So this is more representative of what it would have looked like, what it would have felt like as far as the size goes. It would have been, as per description of my grandfather, much lighter than this, much stronger than this. But that's pretty much it.
And how many did your grandfather say that were amongst the wreckage?
Well, my father had mentioned, he said there was about 30 different symbols, to the best of his recollection. My grandfather didn't give a precise number. He talked more about crescents that faced each other and that sort of thing. He did scribble down some ideas of what he remembered them, along with my father, of course. So about 30, not a certain order, but the size is correct though, and the kind of the outline is fairly correct, and how the symbols lie between the shoulders of the I-beam. In past, we've been talking. It looks like, again, speculation, but it might have been some kind of map.
During this interview, Jesse III makes a startling revelation regarding the I-beam, in that Colonel Blanchard visited Jesse Sr. a few weeks after the event and brought the I-beam back to the Marcel home.
When he returned every piece to the military base. He did exactly as he was told. Well, sometime after that, Colonel Blanchard, who happened to be a good friend, Blanchard and his wife, came over and they liked to play cards with my grandparents. And they played bridge once a week in the evenings. And after everything was gone, the story had died down, Colonel Blanchard brought over a piece of an I-beam. And as my father talking about it, he remembers them standing over the sink in the kitchen and the light coming through the window and taking a look at it. There's a big question whether that I-beam, that piece, didn't stay with my grandfather. Knowing the importance of it, I'm not quite sure if it's that Blanchard had more of it, and maybe it's somewhere there is more of it on that side too. But there's a good possibility that my grandfather and that retain that piece.
And so this is pretty much what Colonel Blanchard brought back to the Marcel household.
Exactly. This is what he would have brought and stood over the kitchen sink with my grandfather, looking into the light coming through the kitchen window.
And you can imagine why he would specifically want to keep this one, because it shows that, first of all, it's not human. Mm-hmm. Nobody would do this. It looks otherworldly. There are definitely symbols on there which suggest that they knew what they were up to, but not necessarily we knew what they were up to. And it's really the perfect testimony that whatever happened in Roswell is what everybody knows it is, which is none of this earth.
None of this earth. Yeah, it really is fascinating. I mean, obviously the silver foil would probably only so interesting after a while, but to actually see the symbols and also be able to, like, you know, in the real one where you would have to look at them at an angle to be able to see them, where there was no indication of the symbols being in there. In fact, they didn't see them until they just happened to hold it, caught the light just right to even notice they were even there. So definitely very fascinating.
So when did it happen? How long after Roswell did it happen that the kitchen sink was graced with this ivy?
You know, I can't be exact, other than I know it was more than a month after the original crash. As far after that, I couldn't tell you, but it was definitely after the return from their 3 weeks of wherever they went to.
So basically, this little incident in the kitchen
Mm-hmm.
is very interesting, because there you are, you have two men who have been involved into something,
Mm-hmm.
have then become involved into the cover-up of this something, who realize that for the rest of their lives they really can't talk about this
Mm-hmm.
anymore, but they have this little cozy get-together
Yep.
in a kitchen somewhere, kind of saying, hey look,
This is real, this happened.
this is real. And you know, to an extent, this being kept by Blanchard and being passed down into the family tradition, or whatever happens to this, you know, the fact that something escaped. They always say that, like, no matter how much there has been a massacre, there's always one person who survives and gets out, and this is like the thing which got away from the grasp of the government.
That's exactly right.
Which could still be out there somewhere, but which definitely survived, like the initial slaying back in 1947. And again, for those two men, after having realized that they could have been part of the largest story ever, they became probably part of the largest conspiracy ever. For them to kind of like sit down and kind of, probably they said something along the lines of, we didn't imagine this, it was real.
You think that conversation would have almost had to have taken place. It's like this, yeah, we didn't, yeah, it's like we didn't imagine this. This is something that happened, and this is part of it.
The Roswell story continued to spread behind the scenes and within the confines of top-secret circles. However, within the Marcel family itself, questions ran deep as well. Not about the existence of extraterrestrial life, but the meaning of it all. By bringing home materials from the crash site, Jesse Marcel had set into motion a quest for understanding that would endure through 3 generations, beginning with his son, Jesse Marcel Jr.
Because at that era, you know, flying saucers were in the rage. You know, you read about these reports in the papers, and the sensational magazines and things like that, which tend to degrade the story. I never discussed this with any of my friends either. I had a lot of friends and acquaintances in Roswell, and I can definitely say I never even told them about what was going on. I felt that maybe this was a probe that happened to land on our planet from someplace else.
From another planet.
In other words, we felt it was all a very unique experience. That we just happened to be at the right place at the right time to see this.
In those early days, it never was a question, it was just a truth. They had the evidence in their hand and they could stare at it. They saw alien inscriptions, an alien language, and they probably wondered what really had happened in Roswell, whether it was an accident or whether it was something more. where these people came from. And so imagine you have this evidence in your hand, but you still have questions.
Well, my initial reaction was maybe most of these were hoaxes and maybe a misidentification of things, but I do know of one that was not a hoax or misidentification. They were, again, looked like the same type of material that the foil-like materials made of. Metallic, dull gray aluminum, except very light again. I did not try to bend it or stress it in any way, although the piece I remember looking at was about 12 to 18 inches in length. Both ends, I think, were shattered or broken off, wasn't as clean cut. And the material thickness appeared to be about a 1/16 of an inch. Well, the most unusual part of this whole thing was what was on the I-beam, on the inner surface of the I-beam. Because as you look at it head on, there appeared to be a type of writing on the mainframe itself. This writing was definitely a purplish violet hue. It did have an embossed appearance because you could, if I recall, you could rub your finger on it and you could tell it had texture. I don't recall seeing any lines or letters of any kind, but it was more like geometric shapes. Or, well, it's hard to describe it. It was curved geometric shapes. There might have been some triangles and circles, but it was solid. Well, I don't recall seeing any piece that was greater than 4 to 6 inches in circumference or in diameter. I don't recall whether I tried to test it for being able to tear it or bend it or anything like that. It was very light and again a dull metallic gray color. And there was a lot of that.
No one knows if the Roswell debris is still hidden in the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson, or if it's been moved to Area 51 or any number of secret vaults the government controls. Nor do we know if it's still being studied, though that would seem logical. We do know the legacy of Roswell will be with us for some time to come, and in time, more revelations about that faithful day may still be gleaned from sources close to the story, such as the Marcel and Blanchard family.
We have some documents that were his private, personal, and there's an aberration in them in his writing style right at the time this happened. And we're going to seek out some ourselves. We don't be too. We want to have professionals look at it and tell us, am I just crazy in this thought, or is there actually something here? And my premise is that he left a trail of breadcrumbs. That there's a lot of story left.
Imagine a world in which our parents told us that in 1947 beings from another world crash landed. That ever since we live with the knowledge that we are not alone. That is a vastly different world, and in my opinion, a vastly more beautiful world than the ones we live in right now, where we are trying to peel back layers of an onion, trying to get to the truth. The truth for the Marcel family is that it happened. The Marcel family is primary evidence, primary eyewitness people who held this material in their hands. One of their endearing moments is Major Jesse Marcel and Blanchard one evening in the kitchen over the kitchen sink, holding an I-beam in their hands and saying, "Do you remember this? This is what is real." And despite millions of people who will never know, and a government who is trying to deny that this ever happened, what I'm holding in my hand and what I'm showing to you is definitive proof of what happened. We do not know what happened to the I-beam. Maybe Jesse Marcel buried it somewhere, or maybe it is in the possession of Blanchard. I'm pretty sure he never gave it back to the government unless he was really instructed to give it back. And as far as we can tell, the government never knew about it until all the people involved had died and decades had passed. So the chances of evidence of Roswell having happened out there with people or in an environment where we can get to it is good.
One of the most mysterious stories of a crashed UFO with alien bodies preceded the well-known Roswell event by some 6 years. This case was first brought to investigators by Leo Springfield in his book UFO Crash Retrievals, The Inner Sanctum. He began a tantalizing account of a military-controlled UFO crash retrieval, which is still being researched today. The details of the case were sent to him in a letter from Charlotte Mann, who related her minister grandfather's deathbed confession of being summoned to pray over alien crash victims outside of Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the spring of 1941. Reverend William Huffman had been an evangelist for many years, but had taken the resident minister reins of the Red Star Baptist Church in early 1941. Church records corroborate his employment there during the time period. After receiving this call to duty, he was immediately driven the 15-mile journey to some woods outside of town. Upon arriving at the scene of the crash, he saw policemen, fire department personnel, FBI agents, and photographers already mulling around the wreckage. He was soon asked to pray over 3 dead alien bodies. As he began to take in the activity around the area, his curiosity was first struck by the sight of the craft itself. Expecting a small plane of some type, he was shocked to see that the craft was disc-shaped, and upon looking inside, he saw hieroglyphic-type symbols indecipherable to him. He then was shown the 3 victims, non-human as expected, but small alien bodies with large eyes, hardly a mouth or ears, and hairless. Immediately after performing his duties, he was sworn to secrecy by military personnel who had taken charge of the crash area. He witnessed those warnings being given to others at the scene as well. When he arrived back at his home, he was still in a state of mild shock and could not keep his story from his wife Floyd and his sons. This late-night family discussion would spawn the story that Charlotte Mann would hear from her grandmother in 1984 as she lay dying of cancer at Charlotte's home while undergoing radiation therapy. Charlotte was told the story over the span of several days, and although Charlotte had heard bits and pieces of this story before, she now wanted the full details. As her grandmother tolerated her last few days on this earth, Charlotte knew it was now or never to find out everything she could before this intriguing story was lost with the death of her grandmother. Other living supporting witnesses included Charlotte Mann's sister, who confirmed her story in a notarized sworn affidavit, and the living brother of the sheriff of 1941, Clarence R. Shade. He does remember hearing the account of the crash, yet does not have any details. And he did recall hearing of a spaceship with little people. There are also fire department records of the date of the crash. The information does confirm the military swearing department members to secrecy, and also the removal of all evidence from the scene by military personnel. Guy Huffman, Charlotte's father, also told the story of the crash and claimed he had in his possession a photograph of the dead alien. A few weeks after the crash, Huffman was apparently given a photo of two men holding one of the corpses found at the scene. Mann's father loaned the photo to a friend but never saw it again. He showed the picture to a photographer friend of his, Walter Wayne Fisk. Fisk will neither confirm nor deny the existence of this photograph. What happened to the bodies of these aliens that crashed to Earth 6 years before Roswell? Could the saucer and physical evidence still exist from this crash, and perhaps it's sequestered away in a vault at Wright-Patterson?
So what we have here is once again what for some people might be a detail, but which for those who know and those who like to find out makes a very different story. Roswell is one of those things whereby really there is a question of belief. On the one hand you have family, the Marcel family, the Blanchards, who've never spoken out. All of these families know, and they know details about this story, which is where the beauty of the story lies. You have to believe that they remember what happened. And what they know is very simple. It is very basic. It is a story about a dad and a husband who one evening comes home and says to his family, "This is something you have to see, because from tomorrow onwards I have no idea what's going to happen." The American government might order a cover-up, or we might have an announcement to the world that something truly extraordinary has happened. But either way, I want you, my wife and my son, to be the first to know.
Not only had he performed this service for our military and done it perfectly, but then he was rejected and basically scapegoated, put in the center of a controversy which he would have loved to have talked to people about. Something that he believed, he believed on his soul that this was something from another place. It was the wonderment, how he could add to the value of our own human existence to realize there's something else out there that actually came to visit us. Very specifically, so this technology did not exist. That what I found out there was not of this earth or built by human hands. He was very specific. He left no room to conclude that it was anything but. He wasn't one to say the government covered this up and it wasn't a weather balloon, but he kept to the high road and just said what I saw wasn't from here.
So 1947 could have been the dawn of a new age. To some extent it was. It was the age when the UFO phenomenon began. But the UFO phenomenon is a question mark. And 1947 could have been an answer. Just after the Second World War, we could have been told that after all the horrors of the Second World War, the millions of people who died, that actually we were not alone in the universe. That this path which we walked on isn't just ours, but one which is walked by various other species. And some of these species come to planet Earth. That there is definitive proof we are not alone. Imagine for a brief moment in time what that world would look like. But instead what we've had is 60 more years of question marks, of cover-ups, of denials and crazy stories told sometimes by the government and sometimes by people who just want to become part of the Roswell story. But so far we still have a question. And what Jesse Marcel and his entire family have always known is that it is not about questions. They know that there are answers. They have seen it, they are absolutely convinced because they know. And so when they tell you that they know, we should take it for value. We should take it as is. The truth of Roswell is that something happened in 1947, in the early days of July. Something crashed just north of Roswell and broke into two pieces. Jesse Marcel found one piece and took it home with him, showed it to his family. A few days later, when that material was all cleared off, they found a second crash site containing victims of the wreck. And at that moment in time, our world changed, because rather than a public revelation or public awareness of the UFO phenomenon, a government cover-up was put in place. Roswell remains a question mark, but only if you do not want to believe that there is an answer.
Famed UFO researcher Raymond Fowler first broke the details of another crash that occurred on May 20th, 1953. Fowler stated that his information came from engineer Fritz Werner, later identified as Arthur G. Stansel. Stansel graduated from Ohio University in 1949 and was first employed by the Air Materiel Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, as a mechanical engineer on testing Air Force aircraft engines. Dr. Eric Wayne, who was suspected of leading a reverse engineering team on alien craft, headed the installations division within the Office of Special Studies where Arthur worked. Stansel signed a legal affidavit vouching to the honesty of his testimony, which was released by Ray Fowler in UFO magazine in 1976. He was working for a company that had a government contract at a nuclear site in Nevada. He was summoned by his boss on May 21st of 1953 and sent on a secret assignment. After being flown to Phoenix, Arizona, he was placed on a bus with blacked-out windows and taken to a point some 4 hours' drive northwest of the city of Phoenix proper. The location was supposedly near the city of Kingman, Arizona. The bus was full of passengers, none of whom Stansel knew, and would not know as they were told not to communicate with each other. Arriving at the secret destination, 2 military light-alls illuminated a surreal scene in the late-night pre-dawn skies of the desert. The engineer was amazed to see a disc-shaped craft embedded into the sand. Stansel estimated its diameter to be about 30 feet. Military personnel surrounded the aluminum-like craft, which was brought down by either an internal explosion or was hit by military rockets. Stansel's duty was to calculate the speed of the craft, which he did. Afterwards, he began to glean details from some of the other personnel assigned to this off-the-record mission. He was told of a small cabin inside the craft and very small chairs. He did not get to look into the unknown craft himself. He was taken back when he peeked into a nearby medical tent. Inside was the small body of a creature about 4 feet tall. He asserts that the alien was wearing a type of skull cap and a silver suit. The suit seemed to be seamless. Back on the return trip home, all the members of the assignment were ordered to sign the Official Secrets Act and were warned not to discuss what they had seen with anyone. Before bringing the crash story to other UFO groups, Fowler did a thorough background check on Stansel and was satisfied to his authenticity and personal integrity.
There was additional confirmation to the validity of the Arizona crash. Personnel at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base claimed to have been witness to the delivery from a crash site in Arizona. These witnesses claimed to have seen 3 small bodies packed in dry ice. The beings were reported as being about 4 feet tall, with large heads and brownish skin color. The time of the delivery perfectly coincides with the events put forth by Stansel. Unfortunately, the military personnel could not make their names public. Fowler maintains that several other witnesses have come forward in the years following the incident, but the lack of other facts and other testimony leave the case lacking. It would appear that prior to Roswell and after, UFOs were dropping quite frequently from the skies over America. Is it possible the United States were shooting them down? Or could something else have been responsible for the failures that downed these craft early in UFO history?
As researchers began to delve into the Roswell story, specific facts started to emerge. More eyewitnesses were willing to come forward. The route and locations where the debris had been taken and stored was identified, and a clear picture of the incident slowly formed from the available information. Even the man in plain clothes who traveled with Jesse to the crash site was identified.
The man who went with Jesse Marcel to the crash site was Sheridan Cavitt. For a number of years he was only known as Cav, and then his name was identified as a man from the counterintelligence corps at Roswell. Only in the 1980s did Sheridan Cavitt begin to relate his side of the story, and he wasn't willing to say much. Basically, he says early on that he wasn't there, that he wasn't even in Roswell when the alleged Roswell crash happened. He says that Jesse Marcel was never there. And then when some inquiries began to push further, he really began to open up a bit. And in 1994, he was asked to make an official comment, a signed affidavit, in which he said that indeed he had been there, but that what he'd seen was a weather balloon. Cavitt was a man of counterintelligence, which basically means he was paid to lie. And it seems he took this into the grave. Brigadier General Roger Ramey was the head of the 8th Army Division in Fort Worth. A few days before Roswell, he actually said that there was no such thing as UFOs, that what Kenneth Arnold had seen over Mount Rainier in Washington state were just misidentifications of something else. In 1952, when there was a big UFO flap over Washington, he would once again say that there is no truth whatsoever to UFO phenomena. However, it seems that Ramey knew the truth, that there was something to the UFO phenomenon. In the press conference of 1947, he clearly holds something in his hands which refers to victims of the wreck. He is probably principally responsible, or was acting on orders coming from the Pentagon, that the truth about UFOs should be covered up. And it seems he was just the man for the job. And in 1952, when Washington gets one of the biggest waves of UFO sightings ever seen, he is once again the man on the job who says that the American people have nothing to fear about, that all of this is perfectly normal. It's just business as usual. ET doesn't exist. Why was Roswell covered up? Many people have said that it happened because the American government wanted to benefit somehow from the technology it had recovered at the crash site. But I think really what pushed it home was the fact that they had to announce that alien life existed. And I think in 1947, the people, and especially the American government, were simply not ready to do so. Various people have to try to get access to the Blue Room. One of them was Senator Barry Goldwater. He wrote to the likes of Curtis LeMay asking for information and or access to the Blue Room. There are various renditions as to the reply which Curtis LeMay gave him. They differ on the amount of expletives used. But basically Goldwater was told that in no circumstances was he ever going to see the inside of the Blue Room. Goldwater wasn't acting on his own. It is a little known fact that Goldwater was very good friends with Colonel Blanchard, and probably for many years the two of them tried to get to the truth as to what had happened after Roswell with the debris which was recovered from the crash site. There's a reason why Goldwater became interested in Roswell. It's a little known fact that Goldwater and Blanchard were very close friends. And so Goldwater was trying to use a political angle to get the American military to reveal to him what the truth about Roswell was and what the secret of the Blue Room was. And so what we have here is a story which spans decades. We have our core group once again. We know that Blanchard and Marcel officially never said ET or UFO crashed at Roswell. But we also know that they knew. And behind the scenes, they sometimes spoke to certain people who they knew or thought they might help, and who they knew had an interest in the story as well.
What is so terrifying that would cause world governments, even those politically, militarily, and ideologically opposed to each other, to maintain a level of secrecy above the Manhattan Project? Perhaps the most damning evidence that the United States was actively participating in a government cover-up comes from Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso. Corso was the chief of the Pentagon's Foreign Technology Desk in Army Research and Development, working under Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau. And he was on the staff of President Eisenhower's National Security Council for 4 years between 1953 and 1957. In his book, The Day After Roswell, Corso claims that technology gleaned from the Roswell crash helped kickstart technological advancements in accelerated particle beam devices, fiber optics, lasers, integrated circuit chips, and Kevlar material. Corso's duties at the Pentagon required him to oversee the storage of physical evidence and files on the Roswell crash, and to leak this material to corporations for the advancement of our technology. Corso also claimed the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, was meant to achieve the destructive capacity of electronic guidance systems in incoming enemy warheads, as well as disabling enemy spacecraft, including those of extraterrestrial origin. Most UFO researchers agree all roads from UFO crash retrieval incidents lead directly to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio and their Foreign Technology Division. Wright-Patterson's Foreign Technology Laboratories
are the final destination for any material recovered from other nations, which may have some strategic value to our military. Technology is acquired, then back engineered to determine how it was made and to glean any useful advances that may further our own technology. Not only is Wright-Patterson the logical destination for UFO material, there are many who say they have seen or know of the existence of alien bodies there as well. In 1947, something crashed in Corona near Roswell, New Mexico. Debris from that crash is reported to have been sent to Wright-Patterson, as well as the bodies of the craft's occupants. No one knows if they are still there today, though it is well known that Wright-Patterson does have long-term cold storage facilities where bodies could be preserved. In his book, The Day After Roswell, Colonel Philip J. Corso claims he stewarded extraterrestrial artifacts recovered from the crash near Roswell. Corso was chief of the Pentagon's Foreign Technology Desk in Army Research and Development in 1961, working under Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau. Corso says a covert government group was assembled under the leadership of the first Director of Central Intelligence, Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkotter, which was called Majestic 12. Among its tasks was to collect all information on off-planet technology. According to Corso, the reverse engineering of these artifacts indirectly led to the development of accelerated particle beam devices, fiber optics, lasers, integrated circuit chips, and Kevlar material. In the book, Corso claims the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, Star Wars, was meant to achieve the destructive capability of electronics guidance systems and incoming enemy warheads, as well as the disabling of enemy spacecraft, including those of extraterrestrial origin. Several previous employees and military personnel that have been stationed at Wright-Patterson have come forward and claimed there are secret underground facilities there. These facilities are said to have been installed under Hangar 18 and 23 with adjoining tunnels. No one knows how deep or how large the underground system is, but claims persist that intact, even fully functional saucers are housed there. Not only do they have material from crashed UFOs and saucers, rumors persist that the government is also keeping live aliens in special atmospheric chambers within these underground sections. Bodies of dead aliens and chambers with living alien beings secure within the confines of a heavily guarded military airbase in the United States? You may say this is the stuff of science fiction, but the government has for decades and continues to keep sinister secrets from the public. Wright-Patterson is just one of many secret locations within the United States that facilities such as this do exist.